Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Remnant Podcast. I am Rachel Hogan, and I will be your host today. This podcast is dedicated to sharing personal testimony of how God's unwavering pursuit continues to transform lives. Today, I am honored to be interviewing one of my best friends, Whitney. She is excited to share how God's plan for her life was different than she planned. Welcome, Whitney.
Hi.
I'm excited to have you on, and this is, just so everyone knows, this is not Dustin.
No.
Interviewing, and we're kind of excited for this to be different, but also it's brand new to me, and but I'm excited to interview one of my best friends and just be a part of being able to share what God has done in her life. And actually, this part of your testimony, I've walked with you through, so that's actually really exciting.
Yeah. So just a little bit of backstory. I grew up in church. I would say, I don't know that I really got like saved. I kind of got saved like all church kids get saved in the beginning. Like you're just there and you know Jesus. But when I was a senior, I really like that's when I was like, okay, dedicating my life to God. And then like right after that, pretty much like fell asleep, woke up the next morning, got married. Like,
because you got married young.
I got married at 18. And then Seth and I, we started our family really young. I was actually 20 when I got pregnant for the first time, and that actually ended up being a miscarriage. And then I had two girls. I had Emery, and then a year later I had Natalie. And then in 2015, I had another miscarriage. And then in 2017, I had another miscarriage. And then in 2018, we had our son who passed away. And then 2019, we had our son. And then in 2022, we had another daughter.
Wild.
She was the shocker.
Well, and I remember that day, I think we had our girls going to Awana, and we were just riding back in the van, and you're like, I have something to tell you.
Well, I remember we were on the highway, and I was like, I was driving down the highway, and I was shaking because I had just found out like a few days before.
Yeah.
And you were one of the first people that I told. I was like shaking as I was driving. I was like, this is so dangerous. But I was excited to tell you. And you were like, what? Because we were done.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what I'm going to be talking about today.
Well, before we get started on that, I kind of interrupted that, but let's go back and just talk a little bit more about you got saved, and just so everybody knows just a little bit of that history. But, as I've known you, you've definitely been that strong Christian, the one I go to, and
so sweet.
With questions and with prayers, and you're encouraging me. How can I pray for you? But, we all have, just so everyone knows, we all have a testimony, and our testimonies, we can go back from the first time we got saved all the way till now, but then there are bits and pieces. And I think that's what's cool, is because you have walked with the Lord for a very long period of your life. But there are bits and pieces that you want to talk about now, and you want to hone in on one specific situation. And when you were asked to do this with us, it's been a while, because Seth recorded his a few months ago, and it's been a while. And for those of you who don't know, we've been doing this since about April. So if this is your first to listen to, I encourage you to go back and listen to the other ones. They are all so different, and everybody, it's cool because some people have these radical, amazing stories of how God touched their lives, and others are honing in on one specific event. God is always working in our lives and continuing to do great things for each and every one of us. And I think that's what's cool about testimonies, is because
it's all so different.
It is. And you were like, when we first asked, well, am I going to talk about Boone? Am I going to talk about my marriage? Am I going to talk about life?
There were so many things. I was honestly shocked when I felt like God, because I never even really thought about this, what I'm going to talk about today, being my testimony. It just never really occurred to me. And so, as I've been like thinking about this over the last few months, I'm like, am I going to talk about being, abandoned and like have that abandonment, stuff. And then, or am I going to talk about having lost a child, or, the struggles that I went through to like grow my family, or, am I going to talk about getting married young and what that really looks like and the struggle that comes with that? Like, there were so many things that I was like, surely I have quite a few. I mean, I have struggled. It's so weird. I was actually talking about this earlier today, but I have struggled with things before where it's like, you know, you grow up in church and you're just like, it's testimony. And I'm like, God, I don't even really feel like I never did drugs. I never drank. I never smoked, like nothing. I never did anything like that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had like my major struggles, but you know, you hear so many testimonies that are so powerful, and it's like, you know, they come from like drug addiction or alcoholism or like all these things that they were just set free from. And I'm like, I don't even have a testimony, but I have a testimony.
Right. You do. And I know, I mean, things that I've been a part of your life, and you do. And I think that that's where the enemy, he does. He tries to get in and tell somebody that their one testimony is greater than the other.
You feel like your testimony is not as powerful as, like, I would feel like my testimony is not as powerful as yours or as my husband's or as Dustin's or whoever. And so you really compare when the reality is Jesus set us all free from so many things. And that's just what a stupid thing to like struggle with comparison about. Like,
I think it's the one thing that divides so many, right? And really like stunts growth spiritually in people when we begin to compare, because he's made us all unique. We are his creation, unique for ourselves, that I don't minister the way you minister. And, you know, but yet that's where we all come together, and the body of Christ needs all those different types of people to form the body of Christ, to continue pursuing and being kingdom minded, when we can all
not
play
one
our
size
part.
fits all.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's so funny, because I'm going to like jump into my testimony now, because I feel like that was almost like the setup for the struggle. Was I really thought, you know, because I had my first child when I was 21, and I told the Lord, I was like, 30 is my cutoff, you know, like that's it. I don't want to have more kids after 30. Because I didn't want this huge age gap. Like I had this idea in my head that I wanted my kids to be within a few years apart from each other. And, you know, I had a plan. Yes. And so my kids were going to all go to school, and then I was going to go to work, and I was going to be a working woman again out in the field, and, you know, possibly go to school and get a diploma, or not a diploma, get a degree, like just, you know, work on my books that I write, like do all the things, and like really start nurturing like the things that I wanted to do. And so, Israel, my youngest, when he was like 3.5 or about 3, I was like really preparing. I was like, okay, you know, I'm really going to be preparing. And the next year he's going to go into a preschool, and I'm going to get a job. And I was ready. Like I was done having kids. But so there's multiple things to this too. It's like, it's not just like I was just selfishly wanted to be done with my kid, like having kids.
Right.
I really had, you know, I had multiple miscarriages. I buried a child. At that point I had been pregnant 7 times. Like to me, like it was just a lot in a little bit of time. And I didn't want to, number one, I didn't want to take any more risks, because I was really nervous when we decided to actually have another child after, you know, the miscarriages and Boone.
Your body had gone through a lot in all of those. I mean,
I don't know.
Is not, you know,
you still heal. It takes time.
It does. It is still
not just
a life
emotionally. It's
of you.
Physically.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a lot to put on yourself. And so, to have Israel, we really like put a lot of thought into it. Like, do we really want to do this? And at the end of the day, I just had to say, okay, like, what am I willing to endure? And, so, you know, we had him, and it was great. And I was like, okay, you know, so I started preparing my future. I really started like digging in and like kind of like in my head, making that like board of like putting like the Post-it notes and like all the planning and the maps and all this stuff that I wanted to do. And as time got closer, I got more and more excited, and I started really seeing a lot of dreams start taking shape. And so then in 2022, I got pregnant.
Ooh, curveball.
Yes. And so it was very, very shocking. There were a lot of things that it was just instantly, it was just like a flood of emotion and feeling. And it's crazy because like I was so excited because I was never not excited when I would get pregnant. It's always an exciting feeling. I mean, you know, you like take the test and it's positive and you're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But then after that, like the honeymoon phase of like finding out you're pregnant, and you start to adjust, like you mentally have to start adjusting things. And
the ages of the children at that time were what?
10, 9. Oh, how old was Israel?
I think you started to say 3.5.
3.5
3 or 3.5, somewhere around there.
Yes. He had just turned, he was just 3.5, I think. No, I don't know. It's something like that. 3-ish.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I don't know.
But
I don't know how old my kids
you
are.
had a 10-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Yes.
So it's not the whole.
And I was 31, by the way. Don't ever tell God you're not going to have kids after a certain age, because I said 30 and God's like, here's one at 31. So he was kind of like, ha ha. I know, but it's just like, it's kind of like the cherry on the cake. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, it wasn't 30, it was 31. It was like, you planning is crazy. So I, you know, after the excitement of the honeymoon phase kind of like ended, I really, honestly, it only lasted like 2 weeks. And I was like, I was very stressed out. We started looking into adding onto our house. And at that point, it was 2022. So things were just like really starting to get crazy. Mm-hmm. Prices were outrageous. And we were like, we might be like 70 when we can afford to add on to our house. And so, you know, that wasn't an option. We were out of bedrooms. So I have 2 kids in one bedroom. I have 2 girls in one bedroom. And then I had my boy in my other bedroom. And then now I'm having another girl. I found out that I'm having another girl. And it's like, oh my gosh, like what? So room was an issue. Not building on was an issue. Like there were just, and then my biggest struggle was letting go of what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, like you said, you had this plan, you had these dreams, you had the board, whatever, however you want to say that. But also, like, my mind went to, I always loved the stage with my children when it would be like, okay, this one's out of diapers.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm here. It's like you were counting down to even just the independence, not even like
not in a bad way.
No, but it is exhausting.
Yeah.
Being pregnant is exhausting. Toddlers and newborns, it takes a lot of mental.
Every stage takes a little bit of a toll in its own way. But yeah, I think too, you know, there were so many things like I was saying, and, you know, I want to say this really quickly before I like go back to like the devastation. But like as a Christian, I think this was so much harder. Feeling like I was sad about being pregnant was so much harder because I'm a Christian. Mm-hmm. And I know the beauty in it. And I know loss, and I have really close friends and family that struggle with infertility. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, like how horrible of a person am I?
Right.
That I could be sad and like feel in a way like devastated. Mm-hmm. Like, but it wasn't that I was devastated. I love my kids. I'm obsessed with them, you know.
Yes.
I'm obsessed with my babies, all of them. And so it wasn't that. It was just really, when you get down to it, it was losing the future that I thought I wanted. Mm-hmm. And so, but anyway, so, you know, there were just a lot of things that I just got really frustrated because I'm like, you know, it's not like I'm having a baby and then my husband gets this huge raise and we can do all these things. Like, you know, I didn't see problems being solved when I had this life change. You know what I mean?
Right.
I had this life change, and then it was like, I felt like things fell apart. Mm-hmm. And, I didn't really know. I just didn't handle it well. So I did not realize that I slipped into depression. I didn't realize that I slipped into depression until she was about a year and a couple months old, maybe right at a year old. Yeah. And that depression turned into extremely severe anxiety, where I can't remember if we sat and talked about it when it was happening, but like I literally thought I was dying like every day.
Oh yeah.
Last year, at the end of the year, it was like every day I was like, oh my gosh, like I think I'm dying. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, I don't think it's like common to have like a heart attack and a stroke at the same time, but like those were the things that were going on in my mind.
The enemy was having a heyday.
Yeah, I would have chest pain, and then my head would start hurting. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack. Oh my gosh, I'm also having a stroke. Oh my gosh, what's happening? Like I like all these things, like my legs would be tingling, and then like I'd have chest, and it's just like all this crazy stuff. And I didn't realize like everything that I was feeling was a symptom of anxiety, like really intense anxiety, because you know I had struggled with anxiety throughout my life, and God delivered me from anxiety, different things throughout the years, like specific fears or whatever, but this was like really, really intense. And I think it wasn't until probably earlier this year, like January, or not really, I think it was like last year, maybe in December of last year, January of this year, like around that time, around the holidays and stuff like that, God really started dealing with me. Like I started therapy and stuff, which with an awesome Christian counselor. She was just like the best thing in the world. Yeah. Kind of wish she was my neighbor, to be totally honest. She was fantastic. But you know, I started therapy and I got to talk a lot of these things out. And, because a lot of it I bottled up because I was so ashamed. Like who in their right mind would ever be sad about something like that? Right. And I didn't realize, for the longest time, I didn't realize it wasn't having the child that I was sad about. It was losing control. And like, I know that I'm a little bit of a control freak here and there, but I didn't realize how big of a control freak I was until God was like, here's my plan. I know this was your plan, but here's my plan. Right. And I was like, whoa, no. This is not the way I thought this was going to go.
Probably, I mean, just like you keep saying, you know, it was the control, but also just the sadness like came in too when you realized where you were going to have to go. That, you know, it was starting over.
It was how many more years of being a stay-at-home mom? How many more years?
And that's why
which is okay.
Exactly, it is. And like the shame wants to come in because you know how many people couldn't have children have struggled to have children, and now
or want to be a stay-at-home mom and can't.
Right. Yeah. And then, you know, you're going, okay, Lord, I have gone through loss. I have had miscarriage. I've gone through all of this, but you've still given me these children. I want to be thankful for these children. Yeah. But like, yes. And then thinking all of these people that can't have children, right? And what that looks like to, you know, have all of these, to know people that struggle. And to know, like, how can I be upset that I have this life and I know people who can't. You know, that and being able to have conversations with friends and you know, and people in the church, right? Just people in the church, like you said, like, how could a Christian
How could I even talk about it with anyone? Like, it was, and that's, I think, what made it harder, too, is, like, I didn't realize I was grieving the future that I thought I wanted. And I keep saying I thought I wanted because now I realize like it was absolutely not. It was nothing compared to what God had planned for me. Right. And so, you know, but how do you even have this conversation? Like, how do you sit down with somebody? I remember, you know, one of my close friends, I was like explaining, you know, this is what's happening. And I know that there's, you know, infertility and stuff. But then when I'm like, get to the part where I'm like, I'm sad. Like, it's like horrible. It feels horrible. And it just like, you just want to dig a hole and crawl into it and hibernate and just wait for it to all be over, because I don't know how to process these emotions. And so I didn't even know that depression during pregnancy was a thing. But like I said, so I didn't really know that I slipped into it. Just having, you know, having that sadness or whatever in the beginning, I very quickly slipped into depression. And I remember, I think it was last year at some point, I remember thinking like, I don't really remember the last time that I felt joyful. Yeah. And so like thinking about it now, I'm like, I definitely wasn't, you know, I didn't have the fruits of the Spirit. You know what I mean? Like I didn't have joy. I didn't have peace. Like I didn't have these things. And so I was like, even though I loved Jesus, I wasn't allowing him to produce anything like he could have. Yeah. I was still holding on to control. And I wasn't angry, but I was just so wrapped up in like how I felt that I couldn't even after the fact, like, you know, I have this beautiful child. And even then I was like, I was so deep in the depression that I couldn't even allow him to just like, okay, God, here's the situation. Now you have your way. Like I was so deep in it at that point. And so, I'm trying to think where I want to go next. Maybe, I guess this year. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
I mean, I think just you're doing a great job walking through, because I remember, but I think that you were also in a little bit of denial, because I know we would have conversations and I would say things and you would be, no, that's not how, no, you know.
Yes, you're right. Because we would talk about like anxiety or things like that. Right. I'm like, no,
and I would pray with you over the phone, or, you know, we might be young, but we're old compared to our teenage daughters and different things. But, you know, Marco Polo, we would Marco Polo and we'd have these video chats with one another, and we would talk, and I would feel like, this is what I feel like the Holy Spirit's telling me. And you'd be like, well, a piece of that. And it was just, you really didn't, because it was hard to surrender.
Yeah. Yes. I was like not surrendering anything.
Surrounded. With really all of these noises in your head. And like you said, I don't believe that your relationship with the Lord wavered, but I will say, I like the way you put that. You weren't producing the fruits of the Spirit, because there was no peace in your life. You did love, but it was hard for you, because there were times you didn't want to leave your house.
Yep.
You know, you were bound. I mean,
we have an ongoing joke about how often I leave my house, which typically it's not bad. I'm definitely a homebody, but it got really, really bad.
Yes.
Yeah. So this year, it kind of all shifted, and it was kind of wild. Like, okay, so actually, I'm going to back up just for a second, because I want to say, I remember the day that I had Ireland, which is my baby girl. The day that I had her, I was really scared. And this is terrible. This makes me, even sharing any of this, like, I'm just going to tell you the truth. I'm like, I feel like I'm opening myself up to like so much criticism of like fellow Christians and like other people, and it's terrifying. But
we rebuke that lie right
honestly,
now in the name of Jesus.
But I want to say, like, I'm free from how I felt. Like, it's so far removed, and it's such a lie that like I feel like I can talk about it, even though I'm like, really don't want people to judge me. But at the same time, God like helped me so much and restored so much. But the day that I had her, I was really scared. I was like, okay, I was in this depression so deeply that when I went to have her, I was scared that I was not going to feel a connection to her, because I had, even though like, you know, one of my other kids wasn't really planned, but it was like such an exciting, like, oh yay, you know, here's another one.
Right.
I didn't feel that way. And because I didn't feel that way when I got pregnant, I was really scared that when I had her, that, you know, that connection, like they put that baby up on your chest and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's you.
Yes.
I was so scared that wouldn't happen. And so I didn't let anyone come in and like see me before, because I was just like, I was stressed. Yeah. And even during the pregnancy, and I should have like, I wish I would have had clarity of mind, because during the labor, like I was experiencing anxiety, like really, really serious anxiety, where I thought I was going to pass out, and like all this crazy stuff was happening. Like it was crazy. But when they put her on my chest, I am telling you what, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't have words. I literally thought, when I was like thinking about sharing this, I'm like, how do I explain how I felt in that moment? Because I don't think that I don't think that I have words that can adequately explain how I felt.
Right.
I completely fell in love with this little girl that I had not planned. Right. And I like, it almost makes me want to cry. I cannot imagine if God had been like, okay, I see your plan. I like your plan. Let's go with that. And I had like somehow opted out of like his plan.
Right.
To add her to our family.
Yeah.
That is the worst. Like, that's a nightmare.
Right.
Like,
right.
Looking at it now, if I could see, like, I can't picture it, but like, I wouldn't even want to see what my family would look like without her. So it was crazy. So I feel like God was just so good. And while I felt like an instant connection to all my other kids, this felt so different because it was like, okay, God, like, it was just like, he was like, hey,
yeah,
it's okay. Like, there's a plan. And I'm telling you what, we were all obsessed. Like, when I say obsessed, a
little rascal, sweet.
Oh my gosh, she is rotten. she is so rotten, and I love it. And it's stressful. Don't get me wrong. There are days where I'm like, Lord Jesus, like right now we're putting up a fence because we had to call 911 because she ran away, and like all the things. Like, there's some stress. Yes. That girl has a lion inside of her. She has no fear. She has no care in the world. And she is just a wild. So anyway, we're all very, very obsessed with her. And I just think it's so funny. Like, I don't know. I love it. But this year, things really started shifting. So I was in therapy. And so I really started feeling a lot better. I started being able to recognize the symptoms of anxiety. And after I had spent like hundreds of dollars at the doctor. So it's like, okay, let's get a grip here. I was like, I just got to make sure, like, I literally had an EKG done, like all the stuff, because I thought I was dying.
Right. It does. It starts to mess with your head, and then you go from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and you just can't. Yeah.
Yeah. All the depression. I didn't know that. Number one, I didn't know you could be depressed when pregnant. I know postpartum depression is really bad sometimes, but that turned my postpartum depression terrible. I mean, that was the worst postpartum that I've ever had. And then, which is crazy because after Boone, I thought like I didn't have my baby. So like that one was tough, but this one was really rough. And then that turned into extreme postpartum anxiety that I suffered with for like a whole year. But, so, I got through all the, I'm dying. And then I started feeling a lot better.
The anxiety that came through pregnancy, we're saying, transferred into the entire first year.
Oh yeah.
If anything, because I feel like it heightened because it was like, now she's no longer in. But
I couldn't go anywhere. I remember we came to one of the girls' birthday parties at a pizza place. Where did we go? Marion's. And that night it was winter. Yes. And the rain was turning to ice. Yes. And Ireland hated car rides. And I had all 4 of my kids in the car. Seth was at work.
Right.
And I was driving home on the highway in the ice. And she started screaming. She screamed the entire way home.
She hated the car.
And so literally I started blacking out. And I was like really close to my cousin's house. And I was like, okay, if I'm still doing this when I get to her house, I'm going to have to pull in the driveway because I don't want to wreck and kill my whole family. But like I started blacking out because the anxiety was so bad. I could not function. Like there were days that I would just,
there were many
I would
times
cry and cry and cry.
Yes.
But the postpartum depression, which that's a whole other thing too, is like, I didn't get help. I was so depressed, which is very normal.
But you also, like you said earlier, you didn't know that it set in.
No, I had no idea.
Had it, and I believe that the Holy Spirit has shown you that even as you were like, this is what I'm going to talk about. He's revealed more of like when it entered and how it started and how long it was there. Because yes, you would ask questions. Do you think I have postpartum? Like you didn't understand because it was also such a different feeling from the others because you had struggled with some of that which one was it? Was it
postpartum depression?
Yeah, I don't remember.
I had it with Natalie and with Boone.
Okay. Yeah, so I knew that you had it prior, but you were saying this was just different.
This was just so different.
It was layered. And even just now as we're talking, I see it as it slowly crept in and just began to strangle you as you went on.
Right.
Until
I didn't even know. Like I was not
literally
prepared.
Not functioning.
Yeah. I was like, no, there was no warning signs. Like, which now, again, looking back, when you have that clarity of mind and you look back, you're like, oh, that was a warning sign. Oh, there was a red flag. Oh, there I probably should have gone and had prayer.
Right.
But honestly, like I had it was almost like I was so busy and I was so stressed out. I didn't even have time to think about my mindset. And like, I remember I didn't even have her nursery ready until like the last minute because I was like, where am I going to put my baby?
Yeah.
Like you hear the old stories of like people putting their baby in the dresser drawer. I was like, God, is that what your plan is for her? To sleep in my dresser drawer? Like, why? But you know, so it was just a lot. So anyway, this year, I keep saying this year, we're eventually going to get here. So this year in January, February, around that time, I started having this major shift. It was crazy. Like, Rachel, when I tell you it was crazy. You know,
yeah,
I pulled my kids out of public school.
Yes.
Because in February, I really felt God put it on my heart to homeschool. And I was like, okay, God, first of all, do you know me? Do you, like, this is Whitney, you're at 708, you know, this is my address. I almost said my address on, well, it doesn't matter. My husband has businesses, so whatever. My address is literally on Facebook.
True.
Probably need to cut that out.
Actually, when I go to your house, I actually have to look up his business because that's what it comes up.
Anyway, so what was I saying? Oh God.
God, do you really see me? Like, what am I doing? Where am I going to put this baby?
Yeah. So no, this year things were shifting. And so
yes, we did fast forward there. February. We're in February now.
This is why we cannot do podcasts together.
We'll be up here for 2 hours.
So yeah, in February, I was like, you know, do you know who I am? Like, do you have the right place? Because it's me and you're asking me to pull all my kids out of like all this stuff. And so, but it was so wild. Like I started reading like homeschool books because I don't know anything about homeschooling. I was in public school my whole life. My husband was, my kids had always been in public school. So I knew nothing about it. So I really started like diving into some Christian homeschooling books and books on like being a mom and like things like that. And so God really started showing me all kinds of wild revelations, and which shouldn't be wild revelations, but they sure are. And so one of the things that I really struggled with in the beginning when I was like really feeling the urge to homeschool was like, okay, so I'm like, I'm not good enough to do that. Like, I know, I'm not saying I'm stupid, but like, you know, there is a maximum of math that I can do.
Well, and I was like just going to say, I know you and I had this conversation when you started. I have wanted at times to pull my kids out in homeschool, and I'm an educator, but now I feel like I personally have lost that window because now my children are third, fifth, and seventh grade. Yeah, exactly.
And you're first grade?
I'm a first grade teacher, right? You know, and my degree is to third grade. I know the standards to this part. Like, how am I to teach them how to do this math? Right angles, perpendicular angles, intersection. I mean, that's what, Celeste is doing all this crazy. And then now you've got to do it this way. I know it my way. No, Mom, you're doing it wrong. I would have much rather, if I was going to homeschool and that was in the Lord's plan, I could do it in the elementary years and knew that I would grow to learn it for the upper years. I had a whole moment, you know, last month where I was in my prayer closet and I was just like, God, why? If this was the plan, why did you not start me out doing this? Because honestly, this is hard especially when you're pulling them out of school. And like my oldest was going into middle school and she was excited. And so it's been, you know, it has been a struggle, but it was wild because one of the first revelations that God really gave me was, it was like, he just said like, you were made for your children. And good. So I like, you know, I've never really put like a ton of thought into that, but we know that as Christians, he specifically chose us to parent our children. He specifically chose us. He trusted us with their souls, with their hearts, with their lives. Like he chose us, and he put all this trust in me for Emery and Natalie and Israel and Ireland. And so I was like, okay, I can handle that. Like you specifically made me to meet their needs, like as a mother. Right. So, okay. Also, why would we have all the strength that we need? You know what I mean? Like in ourselves. And so, you know, the whole like, God never gives you more than you can handle. I can't stand that saying, because if y'all can handle life, like, let me know how you got to figure it out.
Yeah, let me know how, because it's a little wild. It's kind of a wild ride. And so, you know, I really feel like obviously it's scriptural, where our where our strength ends is where his begins. Like where our weaknesses begin is where his strength begins. And so when we can come to him and be like, okay, God, I cannot do this. Right. So I'm just going to hand this over to you. And then he steps in and it's like, oh, I didn't know that you could do that.
Right.
And it's so exciting to be able to like hand him things. So I've gotten in the habit of handing him like all the stuff, like dinner. No, I'm just kidding.
Manna from heaven.
Yeah. Carbs. But anyway, so, you know, he started giving me these revelations where, you know, I was made for my children and like all of these things, like he's equipped me for them. And so, okay, I'm like, okay, I feel like God, I've said this like multiple times this year. I'm like, I feel like God has my family in like a snow globe and he just like keeps shaking it. And so, you know, he really just turned my heart this year towards my kids in a different way. Like I said before, I'm obsessed with my kids. Like I don't know how people don't want to be around their kids. Cause I'm like, you know, my oldest is going to Christian school in a couple weeks and I'm like, are you sure?
Right.
You don't want to stay home with mom?
Right.
I'm going to miss you so much. Like I love being with them.
Right.
And yeah, they drive me crazy, but they can drive me crazy and I can love them at the same time.
Right.
And so, you know, he really started shifting my heart toward them in a different way. And it's like, I really started seeing, it's like, I have this on the side of my fridge. I have like when God like says things, I like write it on the fridge and, to be kingdom minded. Like we hear that all the time.
Right.
But I really started being kingdom minded for my children's sake. And so, you know, like conversations that I've had with Seth, just as parents, and like, you know, when we get to heaven and, you know, if there are people that are standing beside us, like, you know, you helped lead me to Jesus or whatever, like if my kids aren't standing there, if my kids aren't some of those people, then I feel like that would be a failure for me.
Right.
Because he entrusted me with them. So I want to be on my A game. Right. And so, it's just been a really wild year. God has just started really setting me free from the anxiety. Well, earlier this year, like really set me free from anxiety and depression and all that stuff. And I feel like he's really started like, I've just felt hope. I felt a lot of hope and like I feel joy again. And I feel like a year ago, if we had done a podcast like this, I would have been very like, not somber, but like very serious and like, not giggly and jokey and like all that stuff because I had just lost that part of myself in the depression and stuff like that. And so I feel a lot lighter, which is really great.
So how do you, I mean, besides you felt like that the Lord was shifting your heart in February and just growing you to love your kids in a different way and to really even, I would probably say, pray for them differently.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Where do you think, I mean, he guided you? You mentioned you went to doing some Christian counseling. Yeah. And I know like from personal things, you know, there were other things, you know, that maybe you tried some medication at some point, you know, and then I know you shifted
so I went to the doctor eventually. I went to the doctor and I was just like, listen, I know I'm not suffering from 700 medical conditions. Please help me. And she was like, so we talked about life and she like, ultimately she was like, I really think you're struggling with like severe anxiety. And so we tried like a really light medication. And, so I'm currently weaning myself off of that medication right now, which is yay.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about. So I'm very supportive of like going to the doctor and going to counseling and all of that, because honest to goodness, I do not know. If I would not have gone to the doctor and gone to counseling, I don't know that I would have had the moments of clarity where I could like say, oh God, like, hi, right. Please help me, because I was so deceived. And I think one of the cool things this year that God has really shown me was, so first of all, obviously everything that I felt during pregnancy and afterward, like with, you know, being depressed and anxious and like feeling like everything was out of control because my plan wasn't the plan that was coming to fruition. Right. Was basically like, obviously a lie from the enemy. Like my plan could never be better than God's plan, first of all. But really like one of the cool things was that I had this weird, like this expectation I had put on myself. I grew up with a single mom, and she was a really, really hard worker, and she worked our whole lives and like just really, really dedicated to, you know, we were in poverty, and she went to school and got her nurse's license and like got us out of like low income housing and all this stuff. Like she worked hard. And I think for me, when I was growing up, I didn't realize this until this year.
Right.
Like really, truly like seeing it for what it was like, I think I thought that was the only way to be a woman. You raise your kids and then you work your butt off. Mm-hmm. And so not that that's wrong. I think that that's wonderful. Like, but that was what I wanted to do. Like get my kids raised, get them in school, and then I go to work. Right. Like there was no other option.
Right.
And I think this year God has really been like, okay, well, that's not what I told you to do. Right. Like, so I had never really prayed for God to show me what his will was for this season of my life.
Really had just, as you began to get clarity, your prayers began to shift.
Yeah. It was just like, what do you want me to do? And my season right now, which thankfully, like I'm excited, you know, this year, God also led us to be youth leaders. And so it's been really fun, but my season right now is I have to pour into my kids because I have a little tiny window of time with my children where I get to be the loudest voice in their life. And I get to show them who Jesus is and who I am. And I get to show them the goodness of God. And I get to show them that we can experience the Holy Spirit every single day of our life. And like, I only have a small window, you know, they're going to move out one day and I won't have this opportunity again. And so I feel like I've just had this major shift where I could be like, oh, okay, this is my season. Right. I am a mom. And I know that it gets hard because I think this is the part where I struggled a lot too, is like, who am I? Like, am I never anything more than mom? Mm-hmm. Am I never anything more than wife and caretaker and like homemaker and chef and laundry person? Right. Like what other
shuttle and all the things.
Yeah. I'm here to just drive you wherever you want. You know what I mean? And it gets really hard, especially when every single day it's the same thing. Every day after day. And I told my husband one day, I was like, I feel like I'm just a hamster in a hamster wheel. I do the laundry and then there's more laundry, and I do the dishes and then there's more dishes, and I sweep the floor and then there's more stuff on the floor, and then I vacuum and then there's junk all over the floor. And it's like you go from one room to the other and it's like, what hurricane just came through here? I don't even know. And so, but yeah, so it's been really fun this year because I feel like I've just kind of settled into this, like, okay, right now, I'm raising my kids. And yeah, it definitely gets hard some days. There are, like yesterday, it was either yesterday or today, I literally told Seth, I was like, I got to have a day. I need to get out for just a day. But I don't feel depressed anymore, which is really nice. I don't feel anxious anymore. And I think a lot of the anxiety, like the whole, like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm dying. I didn't realize that I was I was handing my kids to God with like my hands closed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I was holding on to them so tight, and I was like, you know, nobody's going to love my kids the way that I do. Nobody's going to take care of my kids the way that I do. And so then I have this child that I had not planned, and it was like, it felt like so much more pressure. I was like, oh my gosh, like I am seriously needed here. And so like all this crazy stuff like started happening with my body where I was like, what if I think I'm dying and then I'm just going to leave these kids, and like who's going to take care of them? And then but then I started really I started like self-medicating, I guess, quote, self-medicating with the thought that like, okay, at least if I'm gone, then Seth is here. He will take care of my kids. And I remember he went on a bear hunt and I had a really bad anxiety attack. And I was going to say, do you remember this? Because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like freaking out. Like, what is wrong with me? Yeah. And it was so clear. God was like, you have trusted your husband
about 6 months ago.
Yeah. He said, you have put your children in his hands, not in my hands.
Yeah. Wow,
and so it was like such like a revelation moment.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But it's hard. Like, it's so much easier to hand you my baby because I can see you and you're right there and I watch you pick her up. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Than to hand it to God, who I haven't seen yet.
Right.
You know? And so, so that's.
So if we like just take a little bit of this, there were a couple of questions that I felt like the Lord had, or just, even just now. So if somebody's listening to this, right? And they're like, so what did you do besides, okay, I finally need to go get help. Even that, as far as like, I want to talk just a little bit about the shame in talking to people.
Oh yeah.
And, and you use the word church people.
Yeah.
And
I just mean fellow Christians.
Well, and fellow Christians, but I don't know that I wouldn't put the name church people, but I know sometimes it's easier to talk to people who are completely outside of your circle and situation because it's fresh ears, fresh, revelations from maybe Holy Spirit. Cause you said Christian, counselor, that they are able to give a different perspective and view that you've not heard from myself or your other friend or your, whoever they might be that we know we talked a lot of things through. So sometimes, yes, that person outside of, but I just want to I just wanted you to maybe touch just briefly on like maybe how to encourage someone, maybe if they don't have a Christian counselor or what can, how could they be encouraged to even first be directed to find someone.
That was all a lie. I never talked to anybody. Like I was scared. I was so afraid to talk to people because I was afraid that they would judge me. And thus far in sharing my testimony, like, of course, I said I'm a little bit nervous to share it now with the world, but talking about it the last like couple of weeks since I have known that this is a testimony. Like I can say that I have freedom, but I haven't had that response. And so I wish I could go back and just like be like, hey, I'm going to go talk to somebody. So I think that's the first thing that I would tell you to do outside of, I feel like saying pray about it. Like that's I feel like it's a generic response because for me, you could have told me to pray about it. And I was just not in the place, like mentally, like that would have just made me mad. Like, what do you think I'm doing? Like, I am praying. Like I felt terrible for feeling these like emotions. And so I would definitely encourage somebody to find someone that you trust, even if you feel like you're like, you think about like, I don't want their opinion of me to change. I can almost guarantee you their opinion of you won't change. I mean, I feel like you probably still love me just as much as you did a couple weeks ago.
If anything, sometimes it brings you people closer together in a more intimate
for sure.
way because you're like, thank you for entrusting me with that information.
But then they know how to pray for you too. Yes. Prayers are so different when you can be targeting specific things. Like if I tell you like, hey, I have, not that there's anything wrong with an unspoken prayer request, but if I say like, be praying for me, or if I say, hey, I'm struggling with depression, please pray for me. Like it's so different. Like there are scriptures that you can speak over my life. There are words, specific words that you can speak. So I would just encourage you to talk to someone. Yeah. Someone, a pastor or a really close friend, someone that is kingdom minded and someone who has the word in their hearts, because you could go to someone random and they're going to give you a worldly response. But we definitely want, when we have situations like this, we want the response to be filtered through the word. Absolutely. So definitely talk to somebody, because the fact that, or the lie that, they're going to judge you or they're going to look at you differently. I mean, it's just that it's a lie.
Right. And so I guess I also then wanted to, maybe we don't have a lot of answers to this because we are church people. We are kingdom minded. Yeah. But we also encounter people, and not everybody who has listened to our podcast is somebody who is currently in a church. So how would you encourage somebody to, outside of that?
Well, I would say I feel like I get this really cool, unique experience. Like I can say that I understand, which is wild, because I was in a very healthy marriage. My husband and I love each other very much. We have a home, we have vehicles, we have beautiful children, we have, so we were not in a bad situation. My husband owns his own business. So it was like a really beautiful, like looking from the outside in, like, this is like a perfect situation to like have more children.
Right.
But I didn't feel like that. And I was so lost and frustrated and confused and angry. Not really like, I wasn't angry that God was giving me a child. I was angry that the plans that I had laid out for my future were not going to be happening.
Right.
And in that time frame. And so
you were almost in a grieving.
Yeah.
Really?
I really grieved. Yeah. My future for what I thought was my future. But absolutely. I think to people that maybe aren't saved or maybe have fallen away from church or whatever that looks like, I don't really think that a lot of Christians talk about unplanned pregnancies. And I think that's a sad thing because the world, I think, struggles as a whole with unplanned pregnancies, as we've seen in our own country very recently. That's like a huge issue. Mm-hmm. And so I think that having open conversations with people more, I think that would be beneficial. But just knowing that even, saved people and even people that go to church frequently, and like there are women that understand, like having an unplanned pregnancy is hard for anyone. Yeah. Like even in a great situation, in a rough situation. So I don't know. Did I answer your question?
I mean, I think so. And I think what I feel like I want to say, kind of to that is I really, that's what's been so cool about these podcasts, and is people sharing different things, and then people either emailing the ministry, or sometimes, of course, people know as they've been shared, you will share it, out. And so people will listen and they can personally contact you. I've been contacted by my personal testimony. People have contacted Dustin about his testimony. There are people, and that's what is so cool, is because we share, because we are, sharing in the Lord's goodness in our revelations and what he's done in our life, we're able to help somebody else. So even if you're listening to this and it's not you who struggled, but someone who would benefit from hearing Whitney's story, I encourage you to, contact Whitney or share the testimony with those people, because, only I do believe that there are situations that we're going to be able to walk people through. And then there are things that we're not going to be able to walk people through. I've not had an unplanned pregnancy.
Right.
I don't know what it's like to grieve that, be excited and grieve at the same time of what that looks like. Right.
Right.
But we both can share in loss of, that's one of the ways we connected years ago was being able to talk about loss of a child and what that looked like. And, there's not everybody's experienced those things. So I think that that's what's also really neat, is when we can help others just by saying, hey, come talk to me, because I'm a safe space.
Right.
And I want to be able to help you.
I can't judge you.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that I've done too, or felt, or whatever.
I think that that's really awesome. And I think that a lot of people, like you said, are going to, I believe people are going to benefit. And I think so many people have kept their mouths quiet.
Right.
And I wouldn't call it a taboo subject, but also
it feels
when
like
God, it does. Yeah. But when God gives you life, gives life within you, how can you not be excited about it? It's almost like we're supposed to be all the time, but when it's not in our timing, sometimes we're not.
So I'm going to share a scripture really quick.
Yeah.
So when I had Israel, I was so excited because, like I said, I wasn't even sure that I was going to be able to have more kids, because at that point, before I got pregnant with him, I had 2 living children and I had 4 losses. And the last loss being, I gave birth to my child who was alive and breathing, and then he passed away. And so when I got pregnant with Israel, it was like I had this oh my gosh, this perfect rainbow after the storm, and it was so wonderful. And then of course, a couple of years later, I got pregnant again. And so, obviously you heard my testimony. Right. It took me a minute, but there's a scripture, and it's Ephesians 3, verse 20, and it says, now to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us. And I feel like Ireland is the exceedingly abundantly. Yeah. Like I hadn't planned her. When I wrote out what my future was supposed to look like, I didn't write that fourth child, you know, but his exceedingly abundantly is so much better than I could have ever imagined. And so I think when we talk about unplanned pregnancies, it is a taboo subject because the world gives us the answer, you know.
Yes.
We can make it go away.
Yeah.
But if we put our trust in God, I mean, it's beautiful.
Yes.
Like it's beautiful. And so,
well, and even in this, we did talk about, well, I don't have space, and what about the finances and all of that? And
my son has a bed in the living room. That is what we're doing right now. And I was like, God, you looked at this house when I got pregnant with that girl. You looked at this house and you saw how many bedrooms I had.
Yeah.
You saw where the space was and where it wasn't. And there's a bed in the living room right now because that is just what we're doing.
Yeah.
Just trusting God.
Absolutely. And he is a provider in all of the areas. And so absolutely, when there's that unplanned piece, our minds begin to race and go, how do I do this? Do it? Right?
How do I do this in my own strength? And God's just like, why don't you chill and let me handle it? I already knew this was happening. So that's really cool too. Like just trusting in the fact that like, even though it wasn't in our plan and we had no idea it was coming, like he's not shocked.
Right.
He already planned it all. And there's like a purpose and a perfect will for all four of my children.
Yes. Well, I am so thankful that you came and you shared, and this was fun to be able to do it with you. It wasn't so scary. I don't think we did so bad.
We'll see. We'll see what Dustin says later.
But we just thank you for tuning in.
Thank you for tuning in to the Remnant Podcast. The Remnant Podcast is part of Remnant Generation Ministries, a 501c3 registered nonprofit. This podcast is fully supported by Remnant Generation Ministries and from listeners like you. If you have been encouraged by these testimonies, please consider partnering with us through our website at remnantgeneration.net/give or by clicking on the link below labeled support. Thank you and God bless.